The General Overseas Service of All India Radio presents readings from an autobiography or the story of my experiments with truth. The reading from the autobiography is presented by Sri Gopalkrishna Gandhi, writer, teacher, and the youngest grandson of Kasturba Gandhi and Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. The words of the Mahatma in the voice of his grandson.
I had been wedded to a monogamous ideal ever since my marriage, faithfulness to my wife being part of the love of truth. But it was in South Africa that I came to realize the importance of observing brahmacharya, even with respect to my wife. I cannot definitely say what circumstance or what book it was that set my thoughts in that direction, but I have a recollection that the predominant factor was the influence of Raichand Bhai. After full discussion and mature deliberation, I took the vow in 1906. I had not shared my thoughts with my wife until then, but only consulted her at the time of taking the vow. She had no objection. Let no one believe that it was an easy thing for me. I have not the least doubt that milk diet makes the brahmacharya vow difficult to observe. I have yet to find a fruit substitute for milk which is an equally good muscle builder and easily digestible. The doctors, Vaidyas and Hakims have alike failed to enlighten me. Therefore, though I know milk to be partly a stimulant, I cannot for the time being advise anyone to give it up. Brahmacharya means control of the senses in thought, word and deed. For many, it must remain only as an ideal. When between 1897 and 1899 the Boer War was declared, my personal sympathies were all with the Boers, but I believed then that I had yet no right in such cases to enforce my individual convictions. Suffice it to say that my loyalty to the British rule drove me to participation with the British in that war. So I collected together as many comrades as possible and with very great difficulty got their services accepted as an ambulance corps. Our corps was 1,100 strong, with nearly 40 leaders. About 300 were free Indians and the rest indentured. The corps acquitted itself well. We had to march from 20 to 25 miles a day, bearing the wounded on stretchers. Our humble work was at the moment much applauded, and the Indians' prestige was enhanced. On my relief from war duty, I felt that my work was no longer in South Africa, but in India. So I requested my co-workers to relieve me. After very great difficulty, my request was conditionally accepted, the condition being that I should be ready to go back to South Africa if within a year the community should need me. The Natal Indians bathed me with the nectar of love. Farewell meetings were arranged at every place and costly gifts were presented to me. Gifts had been bestowed on me before when I returned to India in 1899, but this time the farewell was overwhelming. The gifts, of course, included things in gold and silver, but there were articles of costly diamond as well. One of the gifts was a gold necklace worth 50 guineas, meant for my wife. The evening I was presented with the bulk of these things, I had a sleepless night. I walked up and down my room deeply agitated, but could find no solution. It was difficult for me to forego gifts worth hundreds. It was more difficult to keep them. I decided that I could not keep those things. But it was easier said than done. You may not need them, said my wife. Your children may not need them. Cajoled, they will dance to your tune. I can understand your not permitting me to wear them. But what about my daughters-in-law? They will be sure to need them. And who knows what will happen tomorrow? I would be the last person to part with gifts so lovingly given. And thus the torrent of argument went on, reinforced in the end by tears. But the children were adamant, and I was unmoved. I mildly put in, the children have yet to get married. We do not want to see them married young. When they grow up, they can take care of themselves. And surely we shall not have for our sons brides who are fond of ornaments. And if, after all, we need to provide them with ornaments, I am there. You will ask me then. Ask you? I know you by this time. You deprived me of my ornaments. You would not leave me in peace with them. Fancy you offering to get ornaments for the daughters-in-law. You who are trying to make sadhus of my boys from today. No, the ornaments will not be returned. And what right have you to my necklace? But I rejoined, is the necklace given to you for your service or for my service? I agree. But service rendered by you is as good as rendered by me. I have toiled and moiled for you day and night. Is that no service? You forced all and sundry on me, making me weep bitter tears, and I slaved for them. These were pointed thrusts, and some of them went home. But I was determined to return the ornaments. I somehow succeeded in extorting a consent from her. The gifts received in 1896 and 1901 were all returned. I am definitely of opinion that a public worker should accept no costly gifts. So I sailed for home. Mauritius was one of the ports of call, and as the boat made a long halt there, I went ashore and acquainted myself fairly well with local conditions. After reaching India, I spent some time in going about the country. It was the year 1901 when the Congress met at Calcutta under the presidency of Mr. later Sir Dinshaw Wacha. And I, of course, attended it. It was my first experience of the Congress. The Congress would meet 3 days every year and then go to sleep. What training could one have out of a 3 days show once a year? And the delegates were of a piece with the volunteers. They had no better or longer training. They would do nothing themselves. Volunteer, do this. Volunteer, do that, were their constant orders. Even here, I was face to face with untouchability in a fair measure. The Tamilian kitchen was far away from the rest. To the Tamil delegates, even the sight of others whilst they were dining meant pollution. There was no limit to insanitation. Pools of water were everywhere. There were only a few latrines, and the recollection of their stink still oppresses me. I pointed it out to the volunteers. They said point blank, "This is not our work, it is the scavengers' work." I asked for a broom. The man stared at me in wonder. I procured one and cleaned the latrine. I saw that if the Congress session were to be prolonged, conditions would be quite favorable for the outbreak of an epidemic. During these days, I walked up and down the streets of Calcutta. I went to most places on foot. Kali Charan Banerjee had spoken to me about the Kali temple, which I was eager to see, especially as I had read about it in books. So I went there one day. On the way, I saw a stream of sheep going to be sacrificed to Kali. Rows of beggars lined the lane leading to the temple. There were religious mendicants too, and even in those days, I was sternly opposed to giving alms to sturdy beggars. That very evening, I had an invitation to dinner at a party of Bengali friends. There I spoke to a friend about this cruel form of worship. He said, "The sheep don't feel anything. The noise and the drum beating there deaden all sensation of pain." I could not swallow this. I told him that if the sheep had speech, they would tell a different tale. It is my constant prayer that there may be born on earth some great spirit, man or woman, fired with divine pity, who will deliver us from this heinous sin, save the lives of the innocent creatures, and purify the temple. How is it that Bengal, with all its knowledge, intelligence, sacrifice, and emotion, tolerates this slaughter?
You just heard the reading from the Autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi, presented by Shri Gopalkrishna Gandhi, the youngest grandson of Kasturba Gandhi and Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi.